If you're planning a trip to the garden center this spring, watch this video before you buy any of their overpriced and boring plant pots. Because today I'm sharing 20 of my favorite DIY planters made from thrift store finds. Some of these are incredibly easy, and some are made from things you might never think to turn into a planter. So let's get started. When I thrifted this 2-tier fruit basket, I knew I wanted to turn it into a planter. I bought 2 cocoa liners at Dollar Tree. They fit perfectly in the bottom basket. I just needed to trim it up a bit to make it fit into the smaller top basket. Then I added some herbs, and now I have a little herb garden right outside my patio door and next to the grill. For this indoor planter, I chose one of those vintage jewelry boxes that looks like a little chest of drawers. Mine was actually a music box, but unfortunately, it no longer worked. To get started, I removed all of the jewelry dividers and that velvety lining from both the top and the drawer. I painted the entire piece with Waverly's Mineral Chalk Paint, and I lightly distressed the edges with fine grit sandpaper to give it an aged look. Then I sealed the paint with a coat of clear wax. To create a space large enough to hold a live plant, I knocked out the thin plywood that separated the top from the drawer, and I also removed the back of the drawer since it had been made smaller to accommodate the music box. Then I used a couple of small screws to secure the drawer in place so it would no longer open. I placed my plant inside a cheap plastic container that fit perfectly inside the jewelry box, and then I covered the top with some sheet moss to give it a more finished look. Finally, I cut down a small stick to prop the lid slightly open because I didn't want it fully open or completely closed, and I had just enough room to tuck in a little bunny figurine. This next planter is super easy. I started with an old paint can I had picked up at a garage sale full of nails. I gave it a really good cleaning, and then I did the same for a spigot that I had thrifted at Goodwill. I mixed up some 2-part epoxy, applied it to the back of the faucet, and attached it right to the front of the can. I let it cure for about 4 to 6 hours, and then it was solid, and it made such a cute little planter. I love adding whimsical elements to my patio and yard. I bought this broken down purple baby buggy at a thrift store for $10. I spray painted the buggy white and its 2 remaining wheels black, and then I added one of my favorite flowers, geraniums. I think this is going to be even more adorable once these geraniums really fill in. Here's a fun idea for using an old oil lamp as a planter. Because I'm going to use an artificial plant, I poured coffee grounds into the glass container. Then I added a little styrofoam for easy arranging. I added several faux stems that I pulled from a thrifted basket of greenery. I thrifted this really nice wooden sewing box at Goodwill and thought it would make a fantastic planter. To dress it up, I first gave it a couple coats of white chalk paint. Then I wanted to decoupage on a botanical design using some napkins that I purchased from Amazon. One thing that I really love about these napkins is that you can cut out the separate images. By cutting a napkin into smaller pieces, you can avoid the wrinkling that usually occurs when you try to apply an entire napkin. Separate the plies of your napkin and use only the top printed layer. Apply Mod Podge to your object where you want the napkin to go, and then carefully place the napkin on top of the Mod Podge using your paintbrush to smooth out any wrinkles. Play around with your arrangement. Perhaps have an image that extends from the side of your box to the top of your box. Once the Mod Podge is completely dry, go over it with a second coat. I decided to add some wording to the front using one of IOD's traditional POTS rub-on transfers. Now you can add a faux or real plant inside. If you're using a real plant, make sure that you place it first in a waterproof container. I love the look of a two-tiered planter, but I don't love the price tag, so I decided to make one for much, much cheaper. I took an old lampshade and ripped all of the fabric off. Then I sprayed the metal frame with a couple coats of white spray paint. For the plant, I found a terracotta pot in my garage that fit perfectly into the top of the lampshade. Then I found another pot that worked for the base. It actually sits right on the rim. If you had a slightly larger pot, you could even have the lampshade sitting down inside the soil. What I really love about this is the shape. As the plants grow in, the vines are going to wrap around those metal ribs, and it's going to create that really pretty layered look. A few years ago, I found this metal chair on the curb down the street and brought it home and put it on my patio. And as far as I know, no one has ever sat on it. So I began operating on it with a Sawzall, cutting a large circle out of the seat so that a wire hanging basket could just fit inside. Then I used my angle grinder to remove any sharp edges. I added a cocoa liner to the basket and used spray adhesive to attach pieces of sheet moss to the remaining sections of the chair seat. I planted some flowers in the basket and also added a couple small ivy plants which I hoped would grow up and around the chair back. I have a couple ideas for turning old magazine racks into planters. Here's my first idea. I loved the ornate fretwork on this magazine rack, but to make room for plants, I needed to remove the wood dividers. I found that if I cut through them first with my jigsaw, then I was able to yank them out much more easily. Once those were out, I filled the holes on the inside with wood filler and then sanded them smooth with my orbital sander. Before painting, I gave the entire piece a good cleaning with liquid sandpaper to make sure the paint would adhere properly. Then I painted it with 2 coats of an acrylic enamel in a soft aqua color for a clean, fresh finish. If you want to use this outdoors, I would recommend applying an exterior polyurethane or a marine varnish over the paint to help protect the wood. I bought this large chandelier at the Habitat Restore for $35, and I think it will be a great addition to my patio. I took off the top part by unscrewing several nuts. This allowed me to remove the inner portion that held the light bulbs. I reassembled the top section, but on the underside, instead of returning the nut, I used the finial from the ceiling cover so that I would have a circle on which to hang a basket. Then I took it outside and gave it a couple coats of a black spray paint with a rust protector. Then it was ready for a giant fern. I think it makes a very interesting planter. I thrifted this little chicken wire basket to use as an indoor planter. I started by painting the entire piece with a couple coats of moss green chalk paint, even right over the chicken wire. I was trying to give it more of a cottage feel. To turn it into a little wagon, I found 4 small round wood wheels in my wood scraps and a dowel rod that fit through the center holes. I cut the dowel slightly wider than the basket, attached a wheel to each end, and then secured it to the base with staples. Inside the basket, I cut a thin piece of styrofoam and glued it in place. Then I stuck in some individual lavender stems and added reindeer moss around the base to fill everything in and cover the foam. For a finishing touch, I tied a piece of jute rope onto the basket and added a wood bead at the end to create a simple handle. And then I made a small lavender sign in Canva, printed it out, decoupaged it onto a scrap piece of wood, and attached it to the wagon with twine. Isn't it amazing how a few small changes can completely shift something into that cottage garden look? You can turn almost anything into a plant pot. I picked up this plaster column at Goodwill for just $2.99. I used a hammer to bust out a hole in the top so that a plastic pot would fit inside. I used a little ivory spray paint on the outside to tone down the gold accents and make it look more like concrete. When the paint was dry, I added my pot and a small fern, and I think it looks like a planter that you would see at a pricey garden center, not a $3 thrift store find. I thrifted this magazine rack at Goodwill for $3.99. Unfortunately, I forgot to turn on the camera for the first part of this project, but I cut down a cocoa liner meant for a small window box. The liner was a thrift store find too. I filled it with dirt and added some flowers and ivy. I thought it would be so whimsical to sit it next to a chair like you would do indoors if it was full of magazines. This was such a simple project, but I really love how it turned out. To add some interest to my rather plain water feature, I thrifted a blue and white vase. And to use it as a planter, I turned it on its side and added an English ivy plant so that the ivy would spill out over the rocks. I've had this little table so long that I don't even remember where it came from, and it doesn't have much life left. So I thought I would just go ahead and plant some small flowers in the drawer. I cut down an old pot liner to fit inside the drawer and added a little potting soil and some moss rose. If you're up for a little more work, you can cut an opening in the tabletop and drop in a plastic tub to create a built-in planter look. I've always loved colorful rag rugs, and I had this one tucked away in my basement, so I decided to turn it into a hanging planter. I cut the rug in half. Then I folded one piece over on itself and hot glued the bottom and sides to create a pocket. Normally I would sew it, but I didn't think I had a needle strong enough to go through both layers of the rug. Once it was glued, I flipped it inside out so that the seams were hidden, and then I folded the top edge down to show off that fringe. To dress it up a bit, I added an assortment of buttons near the top, choosing colors that matched those in the rug. For the handle, I reused a piece of ribbon that had come tied around a new blanket and glued each end to the inside. Then I made a simple rag bow using strips of Dollar Tree fabric, tied it onto the handle, and trimmed it up a bit. And then to hold a plant or live flowers, I cut the top off a Dollar Tree water jug and slipped it inside. I thrifted this combination floor lamp table at Goodwill for $12.99, and I want to try to turn it into an outdoor plant stand. It's really heavy because it has a cast iron base, so it shouldn't tip over. I just need to figure out what is the easiest way to get the electrical out of here. So I'm just going to pop off the socket here, and I think I'll just cut the cord to save myself some time. So now I should be able to pull the cord out through the bottom. I'm not sure how I'm going to get this pole off, and I'm not sure how much this pole is helping to hold the whole thing together. So inside this tube and all through here is probably one long metal pipe. Here's one end of it with a nut holding it in place, and there's the other end screwed into this iron plate. Oh, that was easier than I thought. I thought that was going to be super tight. And there's the pipe. If I cut it, there's no way to screw anything on there. Oh, and that's very loose. So another option is that I go get another piece of this metal tube that would be the right length and just pull this long one out and replace it. Wonder if this will fit on here without taking that off. Holy cow, that's lucky. All right, I'm gonna get this cleaned up and I'm going to spray paint it black. For a really durable, corrosion-resistant finish, I'm using a Rust-Oleum enamel spray paint on the table and on the bird cage. This paint has really good coverage, so one coat completely covered it. To add a plant, I removed the plastic hangers from a hanging pot and cut open the hole in the center of the bottom of the pot. Then I was able to push the plant onto the lamp pole through that hole and up through the top of the pot. I'm sure the plant didn't like that, but it'll recover. Then I slid the bird cage over the pot. I probably should have used an empty pot and added the plant after, or just bought a smaller plant, because I did damage some of the stems. For the next project, I'm going to use this metal stand that I thrifted for just $2.99. I think it was probably designed to hold a gazing ball, but I want to attach a wire hanging basket to turn it into a plant stand. I think I may have originally purchased this wire basket at Dollar Tree. To attach the basket to the stand, I'm just going to use some florist wire. I picked up some black florist wire at Dollar Tree so that it would match the color of the metal. I just twisted the wire through the basket and the stand, and when I was done, it was really secure. I bought this metal welcome sign at Dollar Tree for $5, but right now I'm only interested in using the butterflies. The 4 smaller butterflies popped off easily with pliers, but the 2 larger ones were attached more securely. I think I could have eventually broke them off, but to avoid damaging them and just to save time, I used my angle grinder to cut them off. I don't care for the bright paint colors that you find on most yard art, so I sprayed both sides of the butterfly with some gold spray paint that I had on hand. I think this gives it a much more sophisticated appearance. Once the spray paint was dry, I began attaching the butterflies to the front side of the basket by running gold florist wire, also from Dollar Tree, through the holes in the butterflies and around the ribs of the basket. I also attached 2 of the butterflies to the wire stand. When I finished, I thought it needed a few more butterflies, and I found 2 metal ones in my stash that I had thrifted some time ago. I sprayed them with the same gold paint and attached them with more gold florist wire. This should hold up well outdoors, but I put it on my covered front porch to protect it from the weather because I really love how it turned out, and I may want to use this indoors at some point. You know, I love adding decor to any empty wall space, and that's true outside too. I thrifted this large plastic framed clock and thought I would try to turn it into an outdoor planter. But first, I needed to take it apart. I removed the battery and all of the tiny screws holding the clock together. Then I removed the inner plastic rim and the piece of glass. I set the glass aside because I wouldn't be reusing it. Several months ago, I thrifted 2 cocoa liners for window boxes, and now I finally had a use for one of them. I arranged the plastic inner ring over the liner so that the liner covered half of the circle. Then I used heavy-duty scissors to cut out that half-circle shape. I arranged the cocoa liner over the bottom half of the clock and hot glued the edges to the inner portion of the frame. This is where the plastic ring attaches. I used Gorilla Glue hot glue sticks, which hold up really well even in hot weather. Then I replaced the plastic ring, and to screw it back in place, I used larger screws than the ones I had removed, especially in those spots where the screw had to go through the cocoa liner. Now, to add a plant, I took an aluminum Dollar Tree planter and flattened it out with a mallet so that it would fit behind the cocoa liner. And it fit perfectly. I added a couple of vinca vines to the pot. Vinca is cheap and it's nearly impossible to kill. So I imagine it will grow down the wall in just a few weeks. To create even more wall decor, I picked up 2 metal wall baskets at Goodwill. They were $3.99 each. I gave them both a coat of primer followed by a coat of black spray paint. I didn't want to fill the entire basket with dirt, so instead I used some old plastic containers to hold the plants. I think these were old peanut cans, and they fit perfectly in the metal baskets. Plus, it will be really easy if I want to change out the plants. I hope today's video gave you lots of ideas. And leave me a comment and let me know which of today's projects was your favorite. Thanks so much for watching.